Perfect. Welcome in, everyone. I hope everyone's having a really good day so far. Really excited that you've joined us today to learn all about the workers section of the BIA. I realise I always forget to introduce myself on these, so I'm going to make sure to do it this time. So I'm Nicole, I'm the certification manager at BLab UK. We have a few members of my team on the call as well, some of who you'll meet kind of throughout the next hour, and you'll probably kind of notice them popping up in the chat as well. And yeah, the role of our team is really to help companies who are on their journey to B Corp certification, whether you're at the very beginning and kind of thinking about whether the assessment is the right path for your company, or if you've actually submitted your assessment and you're just looking for ways to carry on improving your impact and improving your score while you're waiting to be verified. And so one of the ways that we kind of help companies to do that is through hosting this kind of impact improvement series. And so this is the fourth webinar in that series of 5 webinars. Some of you might have been on some of those previous calls. We've also got one final improvement webinar happening on the 24th of March. So do sign up for that one if you haven't already. You should have the link in the initial invite email that you received to join this one, but we can reshare it as well. Yeah, so today is all about workers, which is a really important area within the assessment and within any business. And so we're really excited to unpack it and kind of get under the skin of what this section is all about. And so before I just kind of give an overview of the agenda, it'd be really nice to learn just a bit more about who's on the call. So do feel free to kind of introduce yourself in the chat, let us know your name, if you feel comfortable sharing which company you're from, or even just kind of where you are in the world. That would be great to learn a bit more about you all. And if we can just move on to the next slide, I'll give a quick run through of the agenda for today. So we're going to start with Amy, who's going to take us through the workers section. So what it actually covers, and give us some tips around improving your score and things you can be doing to improve your impact whilst you're waiting to have your full verification. And then we have 2 amazing B Corps also with us today, taking us through how they're creating impact for their workers. And both speakers are from B Corps who are Best for the World winners, which means that they're in the top scoring B Corps globally for the workers section. So we're really lucky to have them both with us today. So we have Nicola Ryan from One+All. One+All are based in Stockport, and they make schoolwear. And the really interesting thing about that company is that they make all of their decisions kind of with customers, their team and the planet in mind throughout every stage of the journey. And they've also just won Employer of the Year at the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. So really, really happy to have you with us today, Nicola. And then second up, we have a bit of a double team, Scott James and David Ashford from WWA, which is a built environment and construction consultancy. They operate all across England, and they'll be sharing lots of really interesting insights about all of the work that they're doing around kind of developing their workforce and making sure that they're really delivering impact for their workers as well. So it should be a really interesting session. If you've got any questions as we go through, please drop them in the chat, and we'll also make sure there's time at the end to ask any questions for any of the speakers. Great. And just a very couple of quick housekeeping points. So we're recording the session so we can share it with you afterwards. And if you can just make sure that you're kept on mute during the presentations, but at the end, definitely feel free to come off of mute and ask any questions for any of the speakers. And I think that's it from me. So I'll hand straight over to Amy.
Thanks, Nicole, and hi, everyone. Great to be on the call and taking you through the workers section of the assessment. So we're going to talk through a few different aspects and things to know about this impact area, starting out with who are the kind of key people to engage in your team on workers. And so obviously, if we just move on to the next slide. Thank you. Obviously, number one is HR, whoever looks after the kind of HR function. As we'll talk about, it's of course, a lot of questions about your employees and the benefits they receive and how they're paid and all of that kind of stuff. But also, there's very importantly, of course, it's important to engage your actual employees in this process. So while it might not be that the wider team of employees need to contribute to the answers of the questions, when you're thinking about improvements and what you would like to be implementing in the business, of course, it's really important to engage with your employees in that process and understand what they actually want, to make sure that your action and energy and resources aligned with the needs and desires of the team. And then, of course, senior leadership, similar point of view, engaging. There's some questions as well that are specific to leadership. So they're kind of spread out across, some questions will be referring just to executives, some to non-execs. So wanting to get the input for those. And then you may need to liaise with finance as well. Like I said, there's some questions related to monetary things like people's wages and people's bonuses, etc. Right, into the nuts and bolts of it. So the subsections of the workers section, there's 4. The first one is financial security. So that obviously looks at the kind of remuneration side of things, things like obviously how much people are paid and how that compares to the living wage or the minimum wage, what kind of support options you might be providing to maybe some of your hourly workers who may need a little bit of financial support, bonuses, pension plans, anything like that. We then look at health, wellness, and safety. So this is a kind of a combination of the kind of occupational and office-based, health and safety, the kind of standard approach to that, but then also looks at the kind of a more holistic side of what are you doing to engage with your employees in a way that encourages them to be active or to engage with their or to have, are you providing support from a kind of mental health side, and looks at as well, again, any kind of specific health related benefits for your employees, like, life insurance and private healthcare, etc. Then we've got career development, which looks at a range of mainly kind of training and training, but also kind of what your practices are for trying to promote internally, what your kind of rates of promotions internally have been. If somebody stops working with you, what is your process for their transition into a role outside of the business, etc. And then finally, we've got engagement and satisfaction, which I guess in a way kind of looks at how all of the previous 3 impact your team. So it's about understanding what, on a basic level, are your employees satisfied and engaged, but also looks at other kind of elements that would lead to a more potentially engaging or satisfying workplace, like being having flexible working practices, having good holiday pay, a kind of engaging your team to gain their input before making decisions as a company, etc. So impact business models. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, or we've kind of explained this on some of these previous webinars, but just brief explanation of what impact business models are. So they are sections of the assessment that can open up for companies if there's something specifically social or environmentally kind of exemplary over and above what you do, over and above the standard that you do as a business. So for these sections open up based on a number of gating questions. So gating questions are questions that, depending on how you answer them, they can then open up further questions within the assessment. If you answer a number of gating questions correctly, indicate that you do have an impactful business model, it will then open up a whole new section of questions that are dedicated to the way in which you're especially impactful. It sounds a bit weird when you describe it. If you have one, you'll probably know it. On the assessment, it says next to the section, impact business model. So hopefully you'll know if you have one and you need to know. But basically, within workers, there are two potential impact business models that you might have. One is about being worker owned. And so this is if 40% or more of your business is owned by your employees. And that would be kind of all of your employees, not just management, for example, or execs. If 40% or more of your business is owned by employees, then you would have the worker-owned impact business model available to you. And then the other one is workforce development. And this is for if you are specifically and purposefully seeking to hire people who have barriers to employment, and you're helping them to get into the workplace. You're training them properly, paying them fairly, and engaging them in kind of observing their evolution, etc. So if you have a kind of formal, purposeful program in place like that, then you would be able to see the workforce development program impact business model. Okay, some tricky concepts from within the worker section. So some kind of words of advice, things to look out for. So you may have noticed a question that asks about whether you have any independent contractors who work for you for 20 hours a week or more for 6 months or more. This is kind of considered to be the trigger of where you should or shouldn't consider somebody as an employee through the eyes of the assessment. So if somebody is working above that, at or above that threshold, then for the purposes of the BIA, they should be included in your answers. So when you're calculating percentages, when you're calculating your overall employee base, etc. And if they're not, if they work below that, then you would just consider them to be an independent contractor and therefore a supplier to your business. Subcontractors. So there are some questions that ask about outsourced staffing services. This can be a bit of a tricky one to identify and hone in on. But essentially what we're looking for here when we say outsourced staffing, we're not talking about like outsourcing something that you do as a business. So let's say you manufacture a product and you subcontract your manufacturing. It's not what we're looking for here, because that's, kind of a standard supplier relationship. What we're looking for is if you outsource a core business function that your employees would normally do to an organization who provides you with workers who are kind of working for you, but not, or kind of managed by you, but who you don't have control over. You're not paying them or understanding what they're doing with the rest of their time. So it's for instances like that. The most common example here is like a temp agency, that provides temporary workers through a busy season of work. If you're unsure, I would err on the side of caution and stay away. If you answer yes, that you have outsourced staffing services, you could be gaining points in some of the practices that you do, which are actually double counting, because that's just what you do with your suppliers. So if you're unsure, maybe lean towards the side of saying that you don't have subcontractors, because it means that you're less likely to artificially have points in your assessment. The definition of executives, moving on. So I mentioned before, you have some questions ask about non-executives. And what we consider by executive here is anybody who is either C-suite or is like a director of or head of level. And then anybody who would be kind of below that ranking, whatever the nice way of saying that is, would be non-executive. Great. The living wage. So there's a few questions that ask about the living wage. In the UK, we have like the living wage that the government has. That's not what we're referring to here. We're talking about the living wage as set by the Living Wage Foundation. the UK. And obviously there's, well, not obviously, but if you review that Living Wage Foundation living wage, there is a London rate, and then there's a rate for the rest of the country. And if you're in London, obviously you would be comparing to that. If you're outside of London, it would be the other. There's then a question that follows on that asks about percentage of workers that are paid the living wage for a family. In some countries around the world, there's a separate family living wage. In the UK, actually, the Living Wage Foundation, when they calculate the rate of what the living wage should be, they take into consideration in those calculations the cost of having and caring for a family. So in the UK, we actually would answer this in exactly the same way. It would be same answer for living wage as living wage for family, because you're comparing to the same thing. If you're outside of the UK, then you would just say non-applicable. Great. And then just a small one. This is also kind of a bit of a tip for maybe getting some more points. The question that asks about the number of paid days off. You can include not only holiday days, but bank holidays, if you count that separate to your holiday days, and sick allowance as well. So basically the amount of time that somebody's allowed to take off through the year for personal reasons like holiday or sickness. So usually in the UK, that tends to add up to one of the top two kind of brackets of that question. Great. Calculating maternity leave, which is referred to in the assessment as primary caregiver leave, and that's something else that people sometimes are unsure about. So primary caregiver leave is typically what we would refer to as maternity leave, but obviously may not always be in cases of same-sex couples, etc. So anyway, when calculating primary caregiver leave, I won't go into detail now, but make sure you pay close attention to the instruction within the question and also the learn function, because you have to give two answer options, and it's just a bit, sometimes upon first glance, it seems different to what the calculation is actually asking for. It's all about equivalent of paid and unpaid. Once you read through, it's actually quite clear, but just make sure you pay attention on that question. Another one, lots of tricky concepts in the workers section, and I'll be quick here, but another one is when if you have employees who are in different locations, or maybe there's some rules for certain employees and different ones for others. As a general rule, unless it specifies otherwise in the assessment, it might say all workers, or a question might say what percentage of workers do this certain thing. But if the question is just, do your workers have this benefit or this practice, you should only be saying yes if it applies to 80% or more of your employees. So if it's only something that applies to less than 80%, then you wouldn't be able to capture that, because really what we're trying to do here is understand your actions for all of your team. Another thing to point out as well is that your track is based off of your employee size as your full-time equivalent. So not based on headcount, but based on full-time equivalent. For example, somebody who works for you for 2 days a week would be considered 0.4 of a full-time equivalent. So it's not always as nice and clean cut as that example. You've got full-time workers, part-time workers, and also temporary workers to take into consideration. And there's a really useful link in the knowledge base, which Stacey's just shared in the chat, that you can use to do that calculation to make sure that you're on your exact amount of full-time equivalent employees. Great. And then, Nicole, these slides will be shared around, right? People, yeah. So I won't spend too long going through the low-hanging fruit, which are basically quick wins within the assessment that you can implement while you're going through your improvement process or while you're waiting in the queue. But there's just some tips in here, and we can share them around, and I think they're all fairly self-explanatory. Sometimes it's just pushing a little further for something that might already exist, like understanding if your existing pension fund already offers a socially responsible investing option, which is common. Some tips on how to engage with health and wellness with your employees. Basically engaging with policies. So a good kind of rule of thumb is to look through the BIA and have a look for anywhere where it references a policy. And I'm definitely not suggesting that you just put a policy in for the sake of it. Please don't do that. That's absolutely not the point here. But it's a good prompt. Oftentimes companies feel, we're basically doing these things, we just don't have it formalized yet. So it's an invitation to formalize or introduce some practices that you might feel will benefit your company. So looking at that, again, policy statement on supporting breastfeeding mothers, surveying your team. This is something that doesn't have to be a big drawn out process. You can start out, there's lots of information online that can inform the questions that you can ask your team, and you can do that even just through like a free Google form or something like that. It's great to get the feedback of your team. Number of paydays off, I gave you that tip already. And that's it for me. So I know that was quite a lot to cover in a little while, but very happy to answer questions at the end of the session as well. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amy, for that really useful overview. Hopefully that's useful for just kind of setting the scene of what we're talking about when we think about the worker section in the assessment. Mindful of time, so I'm going to hand straight over to Nicola.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me all right? Yeah, fab, thank you. So yeah, I'm Nick Ryan. My role is Director of Colleague Support at One+All Schoolwear. I have been with the business for 14 years now, and I think I've got the best job because I basically work with our colleagues to make sure that they're happy. That's one of my measures of success is colleague happiness, and making sure that they're enjoying it and they're fulfilled in their work. Could I have the next slide, please? We have been going for a really long time. So we were founded in 1935 and we were a family business at the time, formerly Rollinson Knitwear. We're based in Stockport and we supply school uniform. We have about 70 colleagues worldwide. So the majority of them working out of our base in Stockport. We've been a certified B Corp since 2020 and just really we're driven and drawn to that because that fits with what's important to us. So we know that being kind to people and our planet is great for business, and we have this ambition really to be a real force for good and to inspire others. We have been employee owned since 2015, and we're employee owned through a trust model, which basically means that all the shares are held in trust. And the people at the bottom, these are just who we love, our customers, our people, the workers in our supply chain, our suppliers, communities, our bank and our local council, because it's those partnerships really that make us a better business, and that we work together to make sure that we're growing for the good of everybody. Can I have the next slide, please? So things were not always so great. In about 2008, there was a financial crash and we were running out of cash. It was really not a great place to work at all. We had shareholder greed, so we were existing really to make the shareholders wealthy. And part of that had been part of our culture for a really long time. Our shareholders told us to cope with this. Team, you need to be nasty. You need to cut costs, slash and burn, and really kind of show people who's boss, and that's how you should lead the business. But our leadership team didn't want that, and we're actually a quite different value set, and felt that what we actually needed to do was put people and customers first and before profit, and that the shareholders should come last. And that was a decision that we took around 2008, that we would lead the business in that way. So we made some changes. We increased worker pay, focusing on the lower paid first. We improved conditions for the lower paid, and we put pay increases for directors, for executives on hold. We didn't do any increases for those colleagues. We looked after the lower paid. And guess what happened? Can you believe it? We became much more successful. We started to become a more successful, more profitable business. In fact, today our profits are 8 times what they were at that point. I no longer recognize that business actually that we were at that time. Our people are so much happier, more autonomous, more creative in terms of the things that we need to be doing to be a better business. And we recognised that as this culture grew, where everyone had started to feel and certainly started to act like it was their business anyway, that employee ownership was a really good option for us. So as we started to become more successful and we recognised this big culture mismatch, we thought, who would blame them if they got a great offer to buy this business that was becoming much more profitable? From what we knew of the market, we knew that the most likely buyer would probably shut us down and relocate that business to 200 miles away. And we could have done a management buyout and maybe made a couple of people a lot of money, but it's really at odds with our values and the business values and the way that we like to do things at One & All. And so what happened was the leadership team approached the family with an offer to become employee owned. We had a great support from our bank, who supported us with some funding to enable the initial purchase, which was a majority employee-owned purchase. So originally we had the controlling shares of the business, but not all of them. We have recently just the remaining shares, actually, so we are now 100% employee-owned. And what it means for us today is that we can never be sold. Or we can, but written into our constitution is that if the business is ever sold, then 90% of the proceeds would go to charity. So we can never be sold for individual gain. And the business now acts for the good of everybody and not what we like to call the fat cats. Today in pay differential is really important to us. So again, written into our constitution is that the highest paid person in our business can never be paid more than 10 times the lowest paid, and we retain more profits, which goes back into the business for for future. So just a little bit about the trust model. That means all the shares are held in trust on behalf of the employee. There are lots of ways to be employee owned, actually, so that's our model, but there are many others out there. And the next slide, please. So we found some great benefits to being an employee owned business. The first is that we felt it really perpetuates this great culture where people feel and act like they own the business. And I've already mentioned that happiness is a key metric, but people work really hard, and you can just see it that they're thinking about the greater good and the good of the business and the future. They make sacrifices, and I'll tell you about that in a second. People don't really leave our place. We probably have an average of 1 resignation a year, and we attract really great talent because we find that what people want is to be part of this culture. Is benefits for everybody. And I've certainly noticed that as time's gone on, and from being employee owned, from being a B Corp, the caliber of talent that we're attracting into this business is really, really amazing, actually, really great people. We can overcome adversity. We feel like we're better placed to that. So the COVID challenge was a classic example. We didn't know what was going on. We were really worried about like the lockdowns and how we would survive as a business. And within the first weeks before the first official lockdown, any colleague in our business who was paid a salary of £30,000 or more had volunteered to take a reduction in pay to support the lower paid. So that was anything from 10% to 50%. And they volunteered that to support our colleagues who were on furlough so that we could top up their pay, and so that the business could get through this period. And I just think that's just really telling of employee ownership and that kind of culture that you build. We all have a voice, and we really do, and we contribute to the business and ways we can be better, and we celebrate that as well. But really interestingly, we have a vote of confidence in the managing director 3 times a year as well, and that is that all colleagues contribute to that. So every single colleague is asked 3 times a year, how do you feel about your confidence in our managing director? And they can answer, yes, I have confidence in them. No, I don't. Or yes, I do, but I have some concerns. And people are really, really open about sharing where they're at, actually. So it's a really good metric of how a person's performing, how they're perceived as well in the business. And we share profits. The last few years, that's been an average of £2,000 a year. We pay the majority of that at Christmas, so 80%, or just when people need it, especially if they've got families. And one of the benefits of being employee owned is it's tax free, up to £3,600 too. So it's a great benefit. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share some of the sort of more practical things that we do for our colleagues, for our workers as well. And the way that sort of being worker-centred manifests itself in our business. So we are an accredited living wage employer. and one of the first 6 members actually of the Good Employment Charter. And our business, our chair, is actually part of a team that's really campaigning for Greater Manchester to be a living wage region as well, because we really believe in the living wage and the benefits that has for individuals and for the business. We offer an 8% non-contributory pension. So we saw sort of auto-enrolment a few years ago, and we saw that people were having to see a reduction in their take-home pay for auto-enrolment, and we really didn't want that for our colleagues, because we know it can be really difficult, and so we pay the full amount for our colleagues, so that they don't have to do that unless they want to, unless that's something they can do. We provide interest-free crisis loans. I'd hate to think that if a car breaks down or your boiler goes and you're really struggling, that someone wouldn't want to, wouldn't ask us for help, and so we help people, and we really promote those interest-free loans. And when we do them, actually, we're really relaxed about the repayment terms. So people often tell you that they can pay more than they can really afford, and we go back to them and say, well, let's halve that and let's pay it back over longer, because that'll put you under less pressure. We offer a death in service benefit for all colleagues of 4 times their salary, and we think that's especially important at that traditionally lower paid worker sort of end of the scale, because they're the people that need that most, and they're the people that would struggle most if they lost someone. And actually about 2 years ago now, we did lose a colleague, and the reassurance that gave the family, that benefit that they could pay for funeral expenses and that they could remain in their home after she passed away, was just really unbelievable, really unbelievable. We do this thing once a year called Happy Day. It's a bit like walking into a parallel universe. It's really strange, but we get everyone together and we celebrate all the things that we're really proud of. So we celebrate colleagues' loyalty, so those with long service. We celebrate the best ideas that people have come up with, and we shout about them and hand out awards. And we celebrate our Employee of the Year awards as well, which are voted for by colleagues. And it's just a really nice day to thank everybody, but be dead proud of the things that we've achieved in that year. We intro holidays to customer satisfaction surveys, so just gets everybody thinking about the customer and giving great service. And when we do our survey annually, we award extra holidays based on the result, and this year everybody got an extra 3 days holiday. And in this kind of war for talent, we found, actually, so far, I'm always a bit afraid of saying this in case it changes, that we've found it really easy to recruit people. So recently we recruited 2 developers, and everyone said, you'll never get one of those, like, ever. You'll really struggle. And in fact, a couple of agencies said they didn't want to work on it with us because it was such a difficult market, and we've got 2, and they're wonderful, and we're really proud of them, actually, and they fit in like wonderfully into our business. We have a diversity and inclusion strategy that basically looks around us and goes, who's missing, and who do we want, who do we need at this table that's not here? And we work with the best of the best. Our diversity and inclusion trainer is fantastic, actually, and a real expert in sort of driving improvement. And at the minute, we're focusing actually on courageous conversations about race, which has been really great learning for our business. We have a healthcare cash plan. We've got a lot of people that are on the feet all day doing production or warehouse-based jobs. So we offer a cash plan that means you can claim back things like your dentist, your opticians, physio. And our wellbeing initiatives basically focus around what's important to our people. So we celebrate pride. I've mentioned our healthcare cash plan, pay care, but this week as well, we're doing some menopause training with our colleagues that we can support people and their families in our workforce that are experiencing menopause, or that their families are. And finally, we've built a relationship with our local credit union as well, because we, especially as we look ahead into the future, we think that this is going to be really tricky, for people, and we want our colleagues to have as much support as they possibly can as we go through this difficult period. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of our workers section. As you can see, I'm focusing a little bit on employee ownership today because that was our highest scoring area. But I just thought I'd give you an insight there into what our scores look like. Next slide, please. You should know as well that we're aiming for real living hours accreditation next. So we're a real living wage accredited employer, but we should be one of the first 4 businesses hopefully to be accredited as a real living hours employer, which confirms that we give everybody regular hours. There's no sort of last minute changes. Everybody knows what hours they're working way in advance, and that we give a minimum of 16 hours to all colleagues. This is just a nod to our recent colleague satisfaction survey. So we run colleague satisfaction in January every day on Blue Monday. So we figured whether Blue Monday is a thing or not, I don't know, but that everybody will be at their most honest when the weather's rubbish and everybody's skint after Christmas and, you know, everyone, the dark nights and everything. So we ask everybody, what do you think about working here on that day? And our lowest areas were pay and reward, which was 89% positive. And we asked a new question this year, which was, do you find it easy to switch off work when you're not here? Basically based on some things we'd heard around the business that we wanted to understand better. And following on from those areas, we issued a cross-company increase this year of 4.2%. We excluded directors again from that because we wanted to support our colleagues that are going to find this year especially difficult. The response was amazing in terms of how people felt and people recognising that was our response to the cost of living crisis and us wanting to help. We paid a higher profit share. We made more profits. We told everybody, we were really honest about it, that we wanted to share that with colleagues. And this year we're working towards greater transparency on pay so that people can not only understand how pay decisions are made, but also understand how they can progress in terms of career paths and career journeys. We do loads of multi-skilling as a seasonal business where people move around the business and learn each other's roles. So it makes for an really easy sort of promotion and development opportunities for people. So we're just going to make that a little bit more transparent for colleagues so they understand how that works. And we are going to be hosting some one-to-ones on the right to disconnect as well. Those other areas there, I'm conscious of time, so I won't talk through them all, but they were all 100% positive. And I highlighted some of them. So I understand the purpose and mission of the business, the company challenges of pandemic well, and I am happy at work. And the one that I always love is 100% of our people feel proud to work at One & All, which I think is just amazing. Next slide, please. So just some top tips, really. I think, you know, some of the questions that we get asked a lot are about real living wage and the cost impact of that on the business. And for us, it is most definitely an investment and not a cost. The impact on your colleagues when they can afford to pay their bills and they can afford to live, and, you know, and on their well-being and on the way they feel about work and on the contribution and productivity is, it's tangible. You can see it, you know, people feel so much better. So it is most definitely an investment. The top tip to listen, and everything really is driven by what our colleagues need. So the financial support, well-being support, colleague voice, it's all the things that are important to them. And you've never made it either. There's always more that can be done. We've kind of seen how quickly things are changing, and we're already looking at a different set of challenges that we were a couple of months ago. And so I think important to recognise that there's always more you can do, and I think to look at it through the lens of the lower paid as well. I think I've got one more slide just to show you our progress. I'd mentioned before that we're 8 times more profitable than we were when we started this journey in 2008, and this just gives you a bit of an idea of how sales and profit has increased, and our customer and colleague satisfaction as well. So we're dead proud of that. And if anybody wants to talk to me separately about employee ownership, I'm more than happy to share my details. And that's us. Hope that is useful.
Wow, thank you so much, Nicola. I mean, that was incredible. There was so much in there, and it's echoed in some of the comments coming through in the chat. But yeah, really amazing to hear so many examples of really practical, tangible things that you're doing and kind of promoting this culture of transparency. So thank you so much. Conscious of time again, so I'm going to hand straight over to Scott and David from WWA.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Really good to see you all. What a great presentation from Nicola. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. So I'm Scott James. I'm a partner and sustainability lead across the business with Ward Williams Associates, and I'll just pass over to David.
Hello, everybody. My name's David Ashford, and I'm the People and Culture Manager for Ward Williams Associates.
So we'll do a little bit of a double act. We'll do a fly through. I'm actually down in Truro at the moment in the far southwest. David's up in the deep dark north of Exeter. So, you know, well up there in Devon. So I'll provide a bit of context, having run the B Corp process for us, and pass over to David for the workforce specific areas. The picture in the back of that one is the WAVE project in Bristol, and that kind of sets the tone for our services that we offer. So we're a built environment consultancy. So anything around construction on the professional services side that isn't particularly design related. So obviously in big projects, you get architects, you get engineers. We're the cost program and kind of support system for that, to make sure that clients of all shapes and sizes in their projects that their ambitions are delivered on time and on budget. So those services are quantity surveying, so that's your numbers, your budgets, project management, which is applicable across a number of different sectors, and the consultancy that wraps around that. So an example on this one is the Royal William Yard, which is based in Plymouth, a major regeneration programme. We work and support the clients on the development of that project. So the creating of new towns, new communities, we support that. Rejuvenating towns, so the government's levelling up fund for town place development, we support clients with those kind of projects. We're a limited liability partnership with 120 staff or thereabouts, ever increasing across our offices, our 7 offices. Our next slide, please, James. So those are our offices alongside our colleague with our water bottle. We had a little competition about where the interesting places you could take your water bottle to, your B Corp water bottle. Our offices are from the very far southwest, where we grew 46 years ago from here in Truro into Plymouth, Exeter, Salisbury, Gloucester, London, and most recently opened up just around the COVID period, actually, in Manchester. So we've got decent, solid national coverage in our services. But the interesting thing, sorry, on to the next slide. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. About our background, sorry, yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Our background is that despite our kind of growth over time, one thing we've held really dear in our approach is to make sure that we're really orientated around our staff and professional growth, employing great people that can give them an opportunity for a really exciting career in the built environment. And over time, we've kind of grown organically and kind of geographically, we've grown out from that southwest, but always held dear things like kind of apprenticeships. So our senior partner's been with the business for over 40 years. He's still got a lot of life in him yet, but he joined as an apprentice. So, that's a legacy which is carried on through everything that we do. And what we wanted 2 to 3 years ago now is a way of capturing holistic sustainability within our business, within a strong framework. And the light bulb moment went off when we were working with kind of the design sector, the cultural sector in Cornwall, where they talked about B corporations, and we felt this truly fits with what we're about as a business. So sustainability isn't just about the environment and carbon, or it isn't just about staff development, it's about everything across all that we do. So we started that journey in 2019, and I've kind of got flashbacks now because it was 2 years ago now that we were going through our deep kind of appraisal process for B Corporation, just as the kind of COVID situation really kicked off. Now that we're coming to the end of it, it's nice to talk about, really. So that's when we really got into it, and we've been a B Corp just the same as One+All actually for 2 years. 2 years this summer. So next slide, please. Everybody loves the Chris Whitty comment, don't they? The next slide, please. This one is our overall score. Now, we were a little bit blown away by this. We were aiming, I'm a cricketer, so I was aiming to get 100. I've never scored one in my life, so we were aiming for 100. We got a very high score of 135, and just kind of reflecting on the initial presentation by Amy, we got taken down the path on the impact model, down the workforce development route, which did add depth and an uplift in our score from what we thought we might be able to achieve. But we got a particularly high score and one of the best for the world in workers. And I think on reflection of that at the time of appraisal, one of the real plus points we got was around having access to a really strong employee handbook, which had built up over the years. We've managed to add to it through best practice from colleagues and so on, and other businesses that we've learned from. And that was a really kind of solid baseline for us to really submit a really strong proposition into the workers section of the process. The other bit which we benefit from in our sector is that we're a Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors accredited body. So there's a professional body in place. So what I would say is, if your sector that you come from has a professional body status, that's a really good thing to learn from, to understand more, and to embed into your B Corp application and accreditation, as well as other things like ISO accreditation. So we've got 9001 and 14001. So again, that adds strength and depth. I won't dwell too much more on that, because I know David will pick up on a lot of these points around training and CPD and schools engagement. So if I go on to the next slide. On getting our accreditation, we started to try and communicate this around 3 key themes, and these are trends you'll see across a lot of businesses as B Corps. Ours were people, places and planet, the areas where we wanted to make an impact. Obviously the other P, which is great around the B Corp, is the profit side, which we look to reinvest in the great things that we do, of course. But around people, we'll talk about our kind of employee opportunities around our futures program and hybrid working. We've got a 1% for the communities on our turnover in terms of contributions. So things around volunteering, we're very big on volunteering and working with our local communities. We did that around COVID. The electric vehicles are great for the environment. There are pool cars, but also they were let out free of charge to a local pub that was doing home deliveries throughout the whole of the COVID period. And that kind of thing is very B Corp-y, but it was a natural part of what we do as a business, is, you know, working with your communities. And it's a very genuine thing we try to do across our 7 offices. And on the planet side, just on that, we're launching this year our carbon neutral action plan with a 2025 status or target. We're looking to actually beat that, but there's a real focus on that and how we improve our impact in terms of carbon emissions across the projects that we work on as well. And the last thing I'll say before I hand over to David is the bottom bit. I found the best bit of action that we've done as a team internally since gaining our accreditation is setting up our internal WWA B Corp working group, whereby we've got 2 members of staff from any level across each of our offices, where we work on a regular basis to ensure that the voice of the people, a bit like was talked about by Nicola within One+All, the voice of our team is heard on a regular basis on social areas, environmental, volunteering, anything and everything. So we have a really strong 2-way engagement to really improve our impact. And the final thing that I would say is that once you do become accredited, the framework that B Corp has or B Lab has in place through things like the Beehive online portal and also the specialist working groups. So I'm co-chair of the UK Built Environment Working Group. David sits on the People and Culture Working Group. They're brilliant for growing your impact and listening and learning to others. So great tools to make the most of once you're there. And with that real whistle stop one, I'll pass over to David.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Scott. Okay, so I'm actually a former teacher, so I was really keen to be involved in workforce development and particularly with our learning development strategies. I'm not long have been a team member of WWA, but the main reason that I actually applied and accepted the job was its B Corp status. So it's great to be able to talk to you today. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're sort of doing at the moment and our plans for the next year. And I just wanted to say really that for us, the workforce development is so important when you're really focused on the vision and the values of the company. Our vision really, from a people strategy point of view, is to be an employer of choice and to be the kind of company where people are knocking on the door to come and work with us. And our values are about promoting within, supporting and developing our own. And I guess that kind of, I use the word sort of almost infects everything I do and how I think about people and culture. And currently, we've really been thinking a lot about what type of people we bring into the business and what level we bring them into the business. And we're really focused on I don't want to say young people because they're not, they're junior to the business or they're going through a career change. A young man who works in the Exeter office who was a meteorologist in the Met office who's now sort of converted and working with us and working towards his chartership. But currently we've been really focused on apprentices and we really do want to grow our own. So I've been doing a lot of interviews with school leavers lately and looking at how we bring them in compared to bringing in graduates where they have had a lot of different types of academic type work and experience, but we really would like to value bringing in our own young people and then training them in our way, but focused on the degree level or higher level apprenticeships. And so we did that by really focusing on the type of advertising and being really, really clear about that. So we've focused on getting in touch with colleges, with local schools, talking to the heads of year or the heads of sixth form, the lead tutors in colleges, and making sure that our apprenticeship adverts are out there. We've also been involved with our sort of local networks, so things like Building Greater Exeter and Building Plymouth networks, as well as others, so, like the Southwest Women in Construction, but equally as well using things like the government website for apprenticeships. To the point where we really weren't sure how it was going to work this time, and I had over 90 applications for one apprenticeship, which was absolutely fantastic, but it did take me a very long time to read through all the applications. So therefore, the shortlisting criteria was really important, and we're very keen to obviously support our local communities. So although, initially the criteria was looking at qualifications, looking at the responses to the questions that we asked on application, also was very keen to look at, where do you live? Are you actually in our local area for that particular office? And so that was one of those small criteria that I looked at, is, are you actually a local boy, a local girl? And then the next part of that is then really making sure that we're focused on the people who are going to be mentoring and supervising those people, and really making sure that they have the right skills, they have the time to be able to really invest in that person, and making sure that they get the best outcomes. And actually, to achieve chartership as an apprentice at that level, it takes 5 years at least. So we're really putting in quite a lot of time, effort, money. I describe it as a gift. We're giving a gift, but we expect them to obviously then come back and meet us in the middle with that. And it's quite a big thing, particularly for a 17-year-old to sign themselves up to 5 years. And we really want to make sure that they're right for us, but equally we're right for them. Scott talked just a little bit about the fact that we are part of mainly 2 accredited organisations like RICS and the CIOB, and RICS uses a process called APC, which is about how you sort of get from having done an accredited qualification through to chartership. And I think that is really useful because it has a very strict process and guide to help us work through, but that really is at the end of that kind of development process. Now, we currently have it's 126 employees currently. There should be a couple more in the next few weeks. But we have, I've lost my train of thought. Yes, that's it. We have more than 10% of the workforce currently are going through that APC process. So we've got 16 coming up to 17 who are going through the APC process at the moment. And one of the things we wanted to make sure that we were doing was we were really supporting that by making sure that people had the right support, the right materials to be able to help them through that. So I'm currently working on what we call WWA Futures. It's very complicated, would take me an hour to explain, but a big part of that is about really supporting those people through that chartership process, because it is complicated, it does take time, it does require all sorts of different types of experience, and we wanted to make sure that we were giving really good opportunities for people to understand how that process works. So, for example, meeting up regularly as groups, the supervisors as well, meeting up regularly, but also we're working on a Moodle site to provide e-learning opportunities for all those people. Next slide, please. So next steps. So I think constantly all about the intentions. What is our intentions? What are we trying to do? And actually our senior partner is very much about that, is what are we trying to do? What do we actually want to do? And we've been focused lately on thinking about, that some of the things that people offer their employees, to me, and it's my opinion, seem quite gimmicky. So things like gym membership, which is great if you really go to the gym regularly and you love that kind of thing. But what happens if 60% of your workforce aren't interested? That's a benefit that they can't access. So for that reason, my predecessor put through a staff survey to really look at what are the benefits that are most important to people. And a lot of that was to do with flexible working. If you haven't come across her before, I would really recommend looking at Ruth Gawthorpe from the Smart Working Revolution. Really interesting woman. And a lot of their work shows that things like gym membership is one of the last things that are really interesting for people. They're not really all that keen, but what they really want is to be able to work when they want, how they want, and in a way that suits them and their personal lives. So what we're doing currently, we're in the middle of an almost year-long trial where we're looking at different types of hybrid working. So allowing people different ways of working, whether they could be at home 4 days a week working, they could be in 5 days a week, it could be 3, 2, lots of different splits. And then working with their line manager to understand what is the best way so that we have operational cover. But equally, we're focusing on things like mental health and well-being to make sure that people actually are in, and particularly as well with our more junior members of staff, where we have asked them to come in at least 4 days a week, because we want to make sure that they're getting that mentoring and that support, but also kind of to keep an eye on them and to check that they're okay, and then they're not at home and not really being able to get that support. Are we also now trialing a 9-day fortnight, and we trying to see whether this actually works for us as a company, rather than just impose it and say, right, this is a great idea, we're just going to do that. It was better to trial that and to see how that works. We are very, very busy. Our teams work very, very hard, and we thought that if we actually put in straight away a 4-day week, we would almost be laughed at as like, well, I've got so much work to do. How could I possibly only work 4 days a week? And I think we thought, well, actually, this is all important. We want to give people that opportunity to enjoy their lives, to take that break away from work, and also to focus on productivity. So we thought, actually, we'll start it in a step process and we'll offer a 9-day fortnight and see how that works. And we're already starting to get back feedback, both positive and constructive, on how that might work, and with a view to actually putting that in as a permanent contractual change from 2023. But I think the biggest intention for us is that focus on productivity and output. And that's quite a big cultural change from a world that generally has been focused on time and presenteeism. We're actually saying, no, that doesn't matter quite so much. We want to focus on you being working at a really high standard, achieving that productivity, achieving the best outcomes for our clients. And actually, if you can do that in 3 days, I don't think you can, but if you could do that in 3 days, then wonderful. And we're not going to just focus on you need to be in the office from 9 until 5 days a week, and then working at home and that kind of thing as well. That's not good for the individual. It's not what the company wants. And we're really trying to push that constantly as a thread through all our conversations that we have with relation to people strategy. It has to come from the top. It has to be from the senior leaders. But equally, the next step for me particularly is to build more links and relationships with local B Corp companies and start to look at how we might actually work together, and really start selling a B Corp as a great organization and to be part of. And last slide, please. I don't think I've ever spoken so fast in my life, so apologies. So my top tips are, please start with your vision and your values. I know that I don't need to tell you that, you know, that's kind of obvious, but it has to underpin everything, and you have to just keep on going back to that and pulling back to it all the time. Are we doing this just because we think this is good, or are we doing this because actually it's underpinned by the values that we have already agreed with our team members? I also think it's really important that to try things out and to be really open and honest. The number of times in my career where I've thought something's been a great idea and I'm really all for it and I've worked really hard, and then within about 5 minutes I've realized it's not going to work at all, and we just have to accept the fact and be humble about that and take that feedback and take that criticism, but just remember that it all came from a good place and that it came from that good intention in the first place, and to get that regular feedback is just really important. And another thing that, you know, I think is really important is to be humble and accept that you just don't know it all, and you can't do it all, and to just use experts and consultants to support you and to help you. We're currently working with a former professor from the University of Plymouth to really support our learning and development, which is just fantastic that he's agreed to be with us. And that's it from me. Thank you. I've tried to whiz through that as quickly as I can. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you.
Oh, David and Scott, thank you so much. That was another fantastic presentation, and I appreciate the very quick talking. I think we've just had so much amazing content to get through, so I'm really glad we got to fit it all in. I know we promised a bit of time for questions, but we're at time. So I think we've got the contact details for Scott, James and Nicola on the slide. So if it's all right with the three of you, I'll offer if anyone has any further questions for you that they can reach out to you directly. Otherwise, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having all of you speak, and I hope it's been useful for everyone. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you at the next customers session on the 24th. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.